Let's get into this. Welcome again. Wednesday, 10:13 on your radio dial. Let's get into some of our questions. And here we'll go into Q2. Oh, look, Project 11 is sitting right here. It's a secret. Shh. I got 2 or 3 pretty big projects left for the year. So, like I said, you want to clear your plate and make sure you're ready for a good heaping helping of some good old fashioned fun. Oh, snap. Mac, come hither. Come here. I need you to go upstairs in my room. Yeah. And there's the black iPad that's sitting on in the work bag. Yeah. You'll see it's the one right on top. It's the big iPad. It's big and black. So yeah, one of the questions that came up this week was how do you use your iPhone or iPad to link up so that you can use it as a control surface? So I keep forgetting to bring down my iPad, and I want to cover this today. So I'll wait till my son figures out whether he can find that iPad or not, because it doesn't look like a traditional iPad. It's all encased in that otter box. So let's go into the next one, which is about mastering. And I want to cover all those towards the end of the week. So let's skip that for now. Let's see what this is. Why can't you just copy? Yep, he found it. Look at that. See? Magical. Thank you. All right, great. Why can't you just copy the wave file for the background? Does the background have to be lower? I am not sure where that question was coming from or headed or what the word background means. Does it mean volume in the background? Does it mean behind another audio file? I was kind of confused on this one. So let's try to answer it as best I can for the persons who may or may not have. What the hell is that? No, I don't want to do that. Get out of here. For the person that developed this question, let's see here. Why can't you just copy the wave file for the background? Well, I guess to go to very basic terms, you can copy a wave file. Simple. You can make a copy of it. If you want to talk about it for being on a track, we made a copy of my audio file here, and we had a second version of it over here, as you can see. I'll move this back over here. All right, we made a second version of it here. So we can copy that, and then we can drop it lower in the mix so it would become in the quote-unquote background. You can do that. I don't think anyone said you can't. Why can't you just copy it? Oh, I guess, yeah, you could. But what are you trying to achieve? I guess the answer is, what are people trying to achieve when they're making a duplicate of a wave file, and then putting it on the next track? That doesn't, to me, I don't know why you would do that. I guess what we did shows a little bit of, how you can utilize that to then change the second audio file so much that it's indescribably different than the first wave file by adding harmonics and spreading it out and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. So you can really change it. But if I was doing a true harmony section for vocals, I would probably record another version of this. I wouldn't necessarily record the exact same thing. And in this case, what they're asking is, would you just copy and paste it? The answer is no, I would not copy and paste it. I would just record a second version of it. Just fine tuning those notes. I didn't save this part. There we go. That one's good, and we'll flatten that out like we did yesterday. So I don't even know how to answer that right, because I don't think the question was really asked correctly. Does the background have to be lower? The background what? The background music? The background vocal track that you just mixed? Or copied? I'm not quite sure of the positioning of that, but the answer ends up being, you can copy a track. No one said you couldn't. And if you do, just try to make it much more separate than the other track is, the main vocal versus the backup or the harmonized version. Definitely do a lot of changing to it so it's not exactly the same thing. Because if it is, it's just added volume. It really doesn't do anything to the mix. Where added volume can be done in other places in Logic, for instance, using compression, or for instance, just increasing the volume, changing the gain, just simple things that can be done where you don't need to just double things up. It just makes for a very messy, amateurish based um, project. And I don't think you guys would, you'll see down the road when you get into a more professional setting, that's not a common practice. People aren't always duplicating vocals unless they have no idea what they're doing. And if they are duplicating vocals, then they have a very clear path onto why they're doing that. And it's for a very specific reason because either A, the song dictates it and they need to have that second track to add to the volume. B, they don't have the artist back in the studio so they can't re-record a second version of this to create harmonies or do other things. So there are some times where it actually you have to, you don't have much of a choice, but when you do have the choice, you don't, duplicate a track and create a second version of it. But if you do, then just make sure you're putting it lower in the mix and make sure you're changing it enough that it's not exactly the same thing. Otherwise, you're going to have, like I said, added volume into your mix, and that's not something we're looking to do. Um, Here's another mastering question. We're gonna skip that for now because we'll go up here and answer these all probably next week. Not to say we won't even just touch on them this week. We will, but we'll talk about them. We probably won't demo them because I want to save the demos of mastering for next week. What is the purpose of stacking vocals? So stacking vocals. All right. Let's say I'm going to do 3 different versions of this particular sound. So we know my sound is sounds like this. I'll just give you an example. Here it is. Right. So that was that. Um, so for me, a stacked vocal at this point, we're not talking about track stacks. We're talking about recording multiple takes or multiple harmonies or multiple voices in this given part. So there's my main lead melody. So then we could actually record a second one that's a little different. That's more like, something that would be more of a decrescendo of sort, right? I'll make sure I'm not going to delete anything special on here. I'm not. I'm going to throw this up here. Wow, that one's a little bit of a mess. And we'll just delete this track because that was just a copy. Here's what I'll do. I'm going to actually duplicate this track. And then I'm going to bring down a copy of this just because I'm not going to re-record another version of this. I'm just going to mess around with harmonies. So let's find a note that works well with this note, right? So our original note was this. So let's find a note that works well with that. Let's see if that works. So there you go. That's something close. Okay, that's pretty cool. We'll use that. And there we go. See if that works. Hey, that's pretty cool. So what I did was I just created a second version of the initial melody, which was, something we've been doing. So then I took a copy of it because I'm not going to re-record it. I don't have the artist in front of me. And what I did to this one was kind of created some sort of harmony to that as best I could. I'm not quite sure what the note value of this is, but that works well. Actually, you could probably drop it. No, that's kind of cool. So then what I'm doing is I'm trying to take the um the root value of the, I believe it's C major, and move my notes so it creates some sort of harmony with it. What I'll end up doing, and again, you're talking about stacking vocals, I'll end up making probably a third, and then I'll do a copy of this here, right? And then I'll change this one up as well. So then instead of, and then I'll make it go the opposite way. So let's see how that works. It's a little off key, but here's what I'm going to do to stack this. I'm going to actually pull the second version off to the left. I'm going to pull the third version off to the right. And then I'm going to drop the volume down probably 3 decibels on both of these. And let's just take a listen to what my result will be. So listening to it in stereo, it actually helps widen out and thicken up the vocal track a little bit. Again, I didn't have to do 3 performances of this because I did make the copy. So to go back and answer the first question we tackled today, um, you can have stuff copied and brought into the background, but it has to have that specific purpose, like I mentioned. And that's kind of what's going on here. My specific purpose was to stack vocal tracks and to kind of swing them out hard left and right, and then create harmonies with that. But I didn't want the harmony tracks, the second and third takes, to overpower, and they are overpowering a little bit. So I'm going to drop them down even further, and let's hear what that sounds like. So then I'm going to put the music back in and see what happens. Yeah, it's definitely not following the exact path. Like I said, I'm kind of blindly dropping these harmonies without knowing my note values. I can't really tell right now. But if I could, I would, spend a lot more time, obviously, creating. That sounds a little better. And so there's that last little whoop, which is nice. You can see the pitch right here is B3. So it's good to know. Uh, Probably keep it in G. That's kind of cool. And then we'll move this guy down back to C. There we go. So it really does create this cool stereo thickening, but I don't let these harmonies, overpower the mix. I think that's the key here is as much as I want to put uh, extra stacked vocals on top of each other, I just don't want those stacked vocals to either compete with the lead vocal or to overtake the whole mix. At this point in my mixer, a lot of the signal is going to be vocals because the only other thing I have going on at that point is my um my I think it's my violins, right? Yeah, my violins. Yesterday, what we did was we actually took a copy of this and threw it over here to kind of thicken it up with a little bit with the piano and see how that sounded. So that was interesting. Let's see how it sounds now with the brand new um, harmonies that I put in there. See, now that's a cool result. But you'll notice now that my vocal track in general is extremely loud in the mix. It actually is really drowning out the rest of the stuff that's going on. So now, what I would do personally is I would now create what we call a vocal submix. So this isn't a question that's in here, but it's something that we had not really covered per se. Um, Due to stuff that's been going on and whatnot. So I do have a summing mix here. I don't necessarily need to make it a summing mix. We can just add an auxiliary track, though this one's pretty clean. So let's first show you how to add the auxiliary track. And delete this one actually. Wait, no, I don't want to do that. That's something happened here. No, go away. Okay, back to this now. Thank you. Jeez. And I'm gonna just delete this track because it's kind of bothering me that it's sitting here. Yep. Okay, good. All right. So now let's make a vocal submix. So I'm going to come down here right next to my stereo out. I usually like to have my submixes very close to my final outputs. To make a submix, you go to options in the mixer and say create new auxiliary channel strip. And you'll see it comes up with aux 11, not the sub like I had before. But it's very similar in regards to what it can do. It gives you an input, it gives you an output, it gives you inserts, it gives you sends, it gives you fader. So we're going to actually, whoa, hello. We're going to actually add all of our vocal tracks to the vocal sub. So I have one fader that controls them all. So how do we do that? Well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go in and just select all of my vocal tracks here in my mixer. So audio 6 was just a bounce track, vocal, yep, vocal, vocal. This was kits, this is MIDI, so no. I don't know what this was, but I don't think anything's on it. This is a piano. So now I have my my effects buses here. I'm going to leave those out of there for now. I do have very specific vocal effects buses, so I'm going to go ahead and select those and put those into the pot. And then, yep, I have pretty much everything vocal that I want into a vocal sub. So now that I have them selected, we've basically created a temporary group. And what happens when you have a temporary group? Well, things you do to one track affect the other tracks. So at this point, we're not going to be using a send with a bus to go over to this auxiliary track. We're actually going to be using the output of the track, which means we're going to be directly feeding all of these tracks into one channel strip. We're basically rerouting all of this from the main part of the output, the master track. We're going to reroute it to the auxiliary track. So I'm going to head and click on this. Oh, actually, I should probably check what bus I should use here. I have an input of 1 and 2. Let's change that to a, nope. Let's change that to a bus. Let's make it 9 since 9's not being used. So we got bus 9. Even though we're going to use a bus, we're not going to be using the send. We're going to be using the output. So again, as I go to my output, I'm going to go bus. I'm going to go 9. And now you see all the tracks that I had selected in my temporary group are now all being bussed out to 9. I'll put my mixer back in the race here, and I'm going to push play, and you're going to see now everything feeding into auxiliary 11. Interesting, right? Do I have anything soloed? I don't, which is fine. Oh, you know what? And I'm picking up a bunch of the vocal space designer and stuff from the pianos too. Interesting. So now I have control over that vocal mix right here. So you can hear there's a lot of stuff going on there. But now, because I have my tracks, and let's go back over here for a second. Because I have my tracks, like the piano track here. I don't want to record. There's a huge. What happened here? My routing is right. My piano's not very loud. Why? Interesting. Did I probably have two different buses with the same number. That's what's happening here. Interesting. Yeah, some way these got direct routes out. I'm not quite sure why that is. There it is. That's what I was looking for. Yeah, I you know what it is we had sent all those other tracks to a different bus, and I'm just gonna change those up really quick because it doesn't make. What the hell is that? That yeah. Oh, the ultra beat is the samples missing. Okay, here we go. Cool. All right, so now I got these back in the mix here, and I can actually now re-release these back to those. So now I have a very good amount of control over that total vocal sound. And so you can see I have it pushed way down here. Let me push it back up to the main part of the mix and show you how we can blend now the music portion of the project with the vocal portion. And I'm actually going to go down here and smartly label this sub. And I'm actually going to color it because I usually don't like having my subs and my effect buses the same color. And there we go. Just option C for the color palette. Select the color, changes the color. There we go. So here it is with the instruments and the vocal sub, and I'm going to play with it a little bit, mix it in, spend some time in a cycle mode, listening to it, making sure I got the right blend. You can kind of hear that higher harmony there, really making a big difference in my project. And it could probably go up a little more, but I'm at about -1. So yeah, I pulled the vocal track back because there's 3 copies of the audio, and I'm pushing one out left, pushing one out right. I have one dead center. I have the vocal reverb and delays on there as well. You can see them start coming in. I can actually add a little more of that into the mix as I pulled this back a little more. And so I'm trying to blend the main melody and musical part of this project with the vocal part. Now, it would be much more difficult to do that if I had to now go in and touch each individual vocal track. As I balance one out, it could throw off the balance to the others. That is not really a smart way of arranging your project where you're sitting there. If you touch one parameter, it affects all these other parameters. That's crazy. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to consolidate my vocal tracks. Once I know on their own they sound good. If you noticed before, I soloed these and I blended these on their own, right? And I felt like the main vocal there was good, and the harmony vocals are great pulled out. The amount of effect that's going into them with the delay and the reverb. Cool. So I like that blend. That's a really good blend. So now I have to reintroduce it into the mix. So now what I'm going to do is, now that I know it on its own, it sounds good, I'll consolidate them by putting them in a group, bussing them out to a vocal submix. And now I have one controller that affects the blend, right? With no vocals, it sounds like this. So now as I blend it in, I'll listen to it a few times. And I'll keep doing that. You know, I'll have it a little before the vocals, a little after the vocals, so I can hear how it, you know, feeds into it and comes in and out. And what I'm doing is I'm just pushing my fader in every so slightly, every so often. And then I'm also now monitoring my master out. So this stereo output track here has to be watched as you're doing this. As you're pushing in more volume to the mix, you have to keep an eye on this guy over here. You got to make sure you're not going to, you know, overpower it, create distortion, or have a mix that's just uncontrollably and wild. As we talked about it the other day, one of the steps in mastering is to take it to the next level, but you can't take it to the next level when the mixing engineer has pushed its volume to its max. You can't do that. There is a way to get it to that point, but sending it to its highest level possible during the mixing stage isn't the answer. So our mix right now of that particular part is only peaking at about -3.2. That still leaves me about 5 to 8 decibels of additional mastering audio volume that can be placed in here in post-production. And obviously, this is just like a 5-second section. You'd have to go through the whole project, the 2, 3, 4-minute song. But once you know that your volume is pretty consistent and it's not really peaking out at positive 5.8, which is what Logic's little sweet spot is, then you know that what you're going to produce is a good start before it goes through the mastering process, before it gets to that next level and takes on some new characteristics and brings forth that professional level quality that you're going to get out of your tracks. not just the basement quality. You don't want the raw tracks. You don't want the demos, quote unquote. You want masters. You want perfect copies of your session. So again, just to reiterate, this is all just based on one question: what's the purpose of stacking vocals? There's a couple of reasons, right? Number one, again, I'm not a fan of copying files, even though that's what I did here, because it doesn't give you the true um, blend between vocals. When you have an exact copy with the exact start time, the exact waveforms, you know what happens. Additional volume goes into it. And so that took us on the journey of controlling volume in better ways with vocals, when we do have multiple takes, to then put everything together separately, put the vocals together, blend in your harmonies, blend in your effects, and then take that whole package and send it off to a vocal submix, where now you can blend it into the larger project whole, into the melodies, the instruments, the drums, the whatever else it is you're trying to blend it into. It's a good way of step-by-step building, right? It's all about building from your initial lead vocal to your harmonized vocals and then up to your submix. And like I said, that was all answered just based upon the stacking of the tracks. All right. The offline bounce question here that was posed has a lot to do with mastering. But to answer that question shortly, an offline bounce just means you're not playing it back in real time. You're basically getting a bounce, which means you're exporting to a WAV file or an MP3 file or whatever. You're making a bounce to get a final mix, a series of 30, 40, 50 tracks into one file. To do it online means you would do it in real time. You'd be playing back and bouncing to that file, and you'd be listening to it. And it would take, if the track is 3 minutes, it would take 3 minutes to bounce it. The difference between online and offline is offline, you don't hear it, and it takes about a tenth of the time. So it would take 30 seconds to bounce a 3-minute track per se, as opposed to 3 minutes to bounce that 3-minute track. What are the benefits? Well, bouncing an offline bounce obviously saves time. I mean, that's obvious. But sometimes in an offline bounce, you don't quite get the quality that you would get from a real-time bounce. And I know some engineers are really, really adamant about doing online bouncing, meaning real-time bouncing of the track, because number one, it gives them the moment to listen to it like an audience member, to reevaluate what they did and mixed. Number two, the process that's going on in the computer is converting all of these pieces and data points into one file, right? Converging all of this data. If you're doing it slowly, you can probably be more accurate. If you're doing it quickly, it's not as accurate. But that's not to say that it's a bad one. So, what the hell is that? If I go into my bounce, let me show you this window here. Obviously, up here at the top left, and again, we're already touching on what mastering is going to be like next week. But at the top left here, you'll see that there's PCM and MP3. These are all your file formats. PCM includes WAV, AIFF, and CAF files. Gives you the start and end time of what your bounce is going to be. So basically, for me, it's my cycle right here. And then you see mode. So this is where the real-time versus offline bounce. So when you click on offline, you actually are losing this checkbox that says bounce second cycle pass. So think of it this way, right? You go out and you mow your lawn, and you are jogging while mowing your lawn. Does it cut the grass? Yeah. Does it do it accurately and perfectly? No. You're inevitably going to lose something. So what do you have to do? You should go back and do a second pass and get all the spots that you might have missed while you were running through it. See, but in real time, it actually slows it down even more. So we're going to bounce this in real time, this 4-bar loop. It's going to take probably 4 or 5 seconds. And then it's going to go back and do another 4 or 5 second bounce cycle to try to make sure that it captured every single detail of what was coming through that master track. So I'll say in Pro Tools, mastering is a little different than what goes on here in Logic mastering. But in Pro Tools mastering, I typically do online bouncing. I do a real time bounce. In Logic, I typically don't do it because of a couple of different factors. And like I said, I don't want to get too far deep into mastering today. But just to show you what's going on here, there's other things called dithering. So I know someone asked questions about dithering. There's normalization, which is another whole thing. But the truth is, with a real time bounce, you're going to get more quality out of it. It does take longer, and the longer your project, the longer it's going to take. In both cases, we also talked about last week the audio tail. That means that it will continue bouncing if there is some remaining sound, even though this ended here, right? My bounce ends at 17, which is right here. But if there's sound that came from before 17 that is continuing on because it's part of a delay or a reverb, it will capture that. So your track won't be exactly 4 bars. Your track will be 4 bars and whatever the audio tail till final decay is. So that's also a big thing to consider when bouncing. And we'll talk a lot more about that next week when we talk about mastering. So yeah, just to show you really quick, real time versus offline, the benefits, the pros and cons. An offline bounce is basically not in real time. It's very quick. It's very fast, and it's like I said, it's like mowing the lawn while running. You'll mow it. You'll go, oh cool, but it won't be perfect. When you do a real time bounce, you get the opportunity to also do a second pass, which then picks up all the loose particles, all the little small resolution audio anomalies, and it'll put it into your mix. So it's just a little better quality, a little better result out of that. Okay. Can you adjust compressor parameters while recording live? I actually like this question. This is a good question. So let's do that. Can we? Can we do something like that? I'm just going to go ahead and set myself up. I'm going to mute this for a moment because it feeds back if I don't. And there we go. There we go. Now I'm recording live, right? So I'm going to go in and just record a track. And while I'm doing that, I'm actually going to make changes in the compressor. All right. I'm going to go mess with this compressor. Actually, it's probably a bad idea to do that because it's on a track that I want to keep. We'll just start another one. How about that? And we'll do it to this one. So this is my my comp test, just to change it up so I can delete it later. I don't need it. All right, so I'm going to record in this, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to make changes to this, like drastic changes, to see if it affects the recording or not. So let's do that. And I'm just going to drop the threshold and push it up, push it down while I'm recording. You can see what's going on in the background there. And then I push it up again, and there it is. And now I push it back down and everything. Yeah, I'm going to do a couple of takes on this same track. So, just keep pushing it up and keep pushing it down. Leave it here for a second. Leave it there for a second. Now, let's stop it, and let's see if that had any bearing on the recording. Because that's what you're looking for, right? You want to see if changing the compressor had any bearing on whether the recording ended up being good or bad. I'll open up my speaker again. Here is take 2 of that. Yeah, I'm going to do a couple of takes on the same track. So, just keep pushing it up and keep pushing it down. Leave it here for a second, push it back down and everything. Yeah, I'm going to do a couple of takes on the same track. So, just keep pushing it up and keep pushing it down. Leave it here for a second. And the answer is, ding-a-ling-a-ling, no, the compressor had no bearing on any of the recording volume. Changes weren't made to the signal while I was recording. The only change that seemed to happen, somewhere in here, right, was me actually being a little louder. Let's see what take 1 is all about. No, go away. Take the flex pitch off. It's kind of annoying. Let's see this one. Push it back down. Yeah, sorry. I'm just going to get the whole take in. Drop the threshold, push it up, push it down while I'm recording. You can see what's going on in the background there. And then I push it up again, and there it is. And now I drop the threshold and push it up, push it down while I'm recording. So you can even just tell by looking at the waveforms that not much is happening here. Even though it sounded like something was happening, nothing is really happening to the recording. And this has to do with signal flow. All right. So the answer to this question is an answer that we've already given months ago, back in the early times of audio production. All right. Here is the signal chain. Follow me. It comes from my voice into this microphone. This microphone then goes into a interface. The interface is then feeding into the computer directly into the software. At no point did it go from interface to plugin to software. So on the input side, this is what we separate. You draw a hard line through your signal chain. There comes a point where input then becomes output, and there's no blurred line, and there's no going backwards in either way, saying, oh, this plugin is affecting my input. That's not what's happening. So from my mic to the interface to the computer directly into the software, and then that's it. Input done. There is in no way this compressor somehow inserted in that chain from my mic to the software. When does the compressor come into play? Well, the compressor comes into play after the input stage on what we call the output stage. So once it's here in the computer, or once it's coming out of my speakers, I'm going to hear the effect the compressor is going to have on it. First, it gets recorded, then it plays it back. And during playback or output stage, the effects are going into effect. So, and you know that even though I have, right, these waveforms here, if I change these things, the waveforms don't change. The waveforms are there. They never change. These guys don't look like they're getting boosted or because I'm changing thresholds and ratios or makeup gain. You know, I just cranked it up 34 decibels. Did this get increased? Do you see a visual change in waveforms? No. That's because those waveforms were created during the input stage. Once they're there in the output stage, they can be changed. So to answer that question very simply, changing a compressor during recording is only going to have an effect on what it sounds like, not on how it was recorded. That is a very, very, very key and important idea to know for this entire industry. The difference between input and output, following a signal till it gets printed on paper, and then you take it and you color it in. Let's throw in a little curveball just for a moment. Follow the signal chain from my mic to a compressor in a rack unit. Then to my interface, then to my software. Does the compressor in the rack unit have an effect on the input signal, on the recorded signal? The answer is yes. And if you're are in a recording process and you start changing parameters on the hard rack unit compressor, what you're doing and the changes you'll make will be recorded because it's happening during the input stage, not during the output stage. This was a huge change in the audio industry. When in the 70s and 80s and 90s, when Gotcher and Brooks came out with Pro Tools, this was a huge thing. Prior to that, people were using input-based effects. They were creating effects on the way in. There is a method of creating effects even on the way out with hardware, with rack unit-based stuff. That can be done as well. It's called like reamping, or sending the signal out of the board, running it through a processor, recording it back in. That's something else. But prior to digital recording devices, many of the people would actually create the effects first. So when I sung into the mic, it had its EQ, it had its compression, and it had its reverb. Nowadays, we can record raw audio, take that audio, and have an unlimited amount of time and difference in changes that we can make to the signal without ever erasing or changing the original signal. It's an infinite amount of ways you can change audio nowadays. First step is get it recorded correctly. Then you have the world at your fingertips. Can you adjust the compressor parameters while recording live in the software? Sure could. Is it going to make a difference in the recording? Nope. Is it going to make a difference in playback? Yep. And those are two different things. One's an input, one's an output. I hope I explained that very well. I know not a lot of people are jumping out of their seats with their brains melted and questions galore. But the answer is this is one of the major things that engineers deal with all the time. Should I apply effects before it's been recorded? Should I just capture raw audio? Do I have a set of rack gear that I'm really happy with? Do I record a guitar with pedals? Sometimes you have to because the guitarist can't work in post-production like that. There are so many ways that the concept of input versus output or signal flow is used in our industry. You have to understand it. Otherwise, you're going to do it very, very, very wrong. You're going to look silly. You're going to look like you don't know what you're doing. And that could have a detrimental impact on your reputation. Big words I'm using today. I've been taking Alpha Brain. That's for your brain. Does good stuff. How much gain should a track have? How much gain should a track have? I don't know. The right amount? I mean, seriously, how much gain should a track have? That depends on what you're recording. Man, if I'm recording vocals, these are what the waveforms should look like. If I recorded a piano, this is what a piano should look like. Now, on the input side, right? Yeah, I'm going to start talking like that. Yep. You're going to have to start keeping up. On the input side, the gain should be good. You should have a good recorded level between -6 and 0. We talked about this. It's great. So then on the output side, that all depends on how you want that to stand out in the mix. And with our vocal tracks, with our vocal tracks that we spoke about and we subbed, I talked a lot about that. I said you want to make sure that you have the right blend, the right amount of gain, quote unquote, in your mix. So I created a vocal sub. Even though I liked the way these all sounded, they were all well recorded. I made my changes individually. I started building up from that. And then I took that and blended it in with the rest of the tracks. How much gain did I get to? Well, as we showed you before, the master track only got to around what, -3, -3.5. Man, I got room for more gain. So I can add more gain, or I can leave that room for the mastering engineer to really make things shine. But if I'm happy with what I have here, not there. Moved it over. Sorry, I forgot about that. Right. And like I said, I'm happy with that. We only got to about -2.8 now. Yeah, because I pushed some parameters up a little bit. So at -2.8, I'm pretty happy with the output of that. It sounds pretty good. Right. So I'm good with that mix. I'm good with where the VU meters are, which is a true testament to visual gain. And now I have room to add more instrumentation. So I can add my drum kit in at this point. I can start adding low end frequencies, some synths. And then I still probably will have room when I go to mastering for the mastering engineer to do what they need to do. So gain is very relative to what you want to talk about. How much gain should a track have? Well, on the way in, make sure you record the instrument well. And on the way out, it all depends on how you want it mixed in with the rest of your project. Whether I want more vocal volume, whether I want less, whatever it might be. Let's take a look at these last few here. How loud does the master track have to be? Let's talk about that in mastering. How to do fading on a track? Really? Really? I thought we did fading on a track like 15 times, but how do you do a fade on a track? Well, we did that, and I'm going to quickly just show you. Sorry, I'll go back to these because these are easy. Very simply, T, A is your fade tool, and then you can pull your fade around, or you can eliminate it totally, or you can create it simply by just dragging in. That's how you create a fade. Good answer, right? Great answer, I think. So let's tick that off because we don't need that. How does sample type and resolution affect the audio? Yeah, you know what? Again, I'm going to say this is another mastering based um, question, because right now, when we start with sampling, when we start a project, we said we want to get, basically what the highest is that we can probably use it for at this point. Many of us are starting projects at 4824. That's probably the best sample rate and bit rate resolution. Um, but if you drop it down to 44.1, you can't go back up. How does the sample type and resolution, you probably mean sample rate, by the way. I'll just change that to rate because that's what that is. And resolution have effect on the track. And the resolution really has to do with the bit rate, right? The bit depth. How many ones and zeros represent each sample that are being sampled. So if I have 48,000 samples per second and each sample is 24 ones and zeros, I have a very accurate representation of the analog audio in the digital world. That's what sample rate and bit rate all meant. So how does that affect audio? Well, it affects it because it creates a better resolution, giving you better quality, more accuracy when converting from analog to digital. Again, another question that was back in Sound Basics 1 or 2 that we did back in October or so. But let's talk about it in terms on the way out, because that's really creating the project up front during the recording process, with your interface being at the right sample rate, your Zoom or whatever else you're using at the right sample rate, or your phone at the right sample rate. Let's talk about it on the way out. So again, when we bounce, you do have all that quote unquote resolution that you're talking about. Right now, a WAV file is an uncompressed file. The resolution or bit rate, should be at 24, which I think it was. I don't know why this is back to 16. And then my sample rate, which is my project sample rate, at 48. So this is a decent quality file. For the last 20 or something years, it's been considered HD or high definition audio. Today's standards are much higher. 192 we know is the highest sample rate we can have. And in Pro Tools, we even have a 32-bit float rate, which means at certain times when sound is very complex, the computer will jump up and drop 32 ones and zeros per sample rather, to kind of capture that really detailed, exquisite, beautiful natural sound. And then this other stuff we'll talk about with mastering. But yeah, I mean, simple as that. Sample rate and bit rate have to do with quality and accuracy. So the higher your quality, the higher your accuracy, the better the sound will be, the more accurate that sound will be. All right. So I think we covered pretty much everything I wanted to cover today. There's a few things here that we'll talk about. I'll kick off tomorrow's lesson with the iPad. I have it here. As I was talking, and I don't know if you heard me, I was a little distracted at times throughout the lesson, but I was just trying to test it out to see if it would come through on Logic. The difference is, one of the toughest things is we have to actually get it set up right. And by the way, I finally got it, but we're running pretty late. Just to kind of show you this really fast, I'll go in here and I can do it this way. There we go. So as you can see, let's see if I can see it. Right now, Logic is connected, and it's hard to see with the reflections. Jesus. That's better. So as you can see, Logic is now connected to my iPad. You can see that the vocal track VU meter is bouncing when I talk into my thing. And now you could visually see the entire mixer on my iPad. So what I'll do tomorrow for you is I'll end up going a little more into that and what its capabilities and features are, how to integrate that into Logic itself. So if you have any questions about what we covered today, those questions should be asked now. Or if you go back and watch the video on YouTube, then you just leave it right here. No, up here, please. That'd be nice. Just leave it up here. The video on YouTube to make sure that you have all the questions answered. What I again recommend doing is having this out in front of you during the lessons, and wash your hands. Doing the lessons or watching the videos, and then just type in some of the points that we made, because these are the questions right here. These are the topics that will be on Friday's test. Again, for the rest of the week, please make sure you're going back and catching up on all past projects. If no one else has a question, which I've given you a good 2 or 3 minutes to think about, then I will see you back here tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Make sure you watch your videos. Make sure you get your work done. And enjoy the rest of your day, guys. Holla!